All right, guys, welcome back. Hopefully, everyone's staying healthy, doing well. But it's good to be here with you again. We've been talking about cell division and how there's different kinds of cell division. Mitosis, normal cell division, just how normal cells reproduce, and then you have meiosis. That's for to make reproductive cells. So that's going to lead into this when we talk about plant reproduction, because both types of cell division are done here to do this. So, you know, maybe you thought about, um, maybe you haven't thought about how seeds form. And seeds, and I think you knew that seeds, you plant them in the ground, they grow into crops. But what leads up to forming that seed is actually reproduction. So I want to show it this way, and maybe you didn't think about this, but in this example, they're showing a father tree and a mother tree. And, technically, trees produce both reproductive cells. Okay, so pollen contains one reproductive cell. Within the flower of a tree or any plant, you'll have the female reproductive cell. And so basically the pollen will get carried by wind or birds and taken to another tree, and that's where fertilization occurs, and that's actually how you get a seed. So that is reproduction, and they call that sexual reproduction. And that may seem kind of strange to think of plants and sexual reproduction, but the reason it is because you have two plants involved, and the DNA, the genetic material, does come from both, and so that makes the new tree that forms a combination of the DNA, and it can also allow that tree to be just a little different, to be maybe adapted because the DNA is different. So that's what we call sexual reproduction, and a lot of times this happens because of flowers. So in this diagram here, you can see that this plant will grow and develop, and that's by normal cell division. We call that mitosis. When it's time for this flower to form, that's when these reproductive cells are formed, and we said that is by meiosis. So that's the special kind of reproductive cells that are formed there. So meiosis, you actually get within the flower, you get the female reproductive cell, and on these anthers out here, that's where the pollen forms. So many times, bird or insect can come through and pick up the pollen from one flower and take it to another, and that's why sometimes they call the talk about reproduction. They talk about the birds and the bees, the flowers and trees. That's really where that came from. But as the diagram shows, um, pollination occurs. So the pollen will come down through this tube and into the egg, and that's where the seed develops. And as that seed grows um, into a plant again, that would be mitosis. So you have both kinds of cell division, mitosis and then meiosis, but they have specific things, a specific purpose for each of those. So I hope that makes sense to you. Now, this is showing a variation of that. This is for pine trees or pine cones. And as you can see here in this diagram, that at a certain time of the year, these pine cones will open up. And that allows the pollen from another tree, or possibly the same tree, for these pollen to reach the egg. And it's interesting, they call it egg for the female reproductive cell, and for the male reproductive cell they call that the sperm, but it's really the pollen from the other tree, and then that develops into an embryo and into a new pine tree. So that can happen with flowers or with cones, different groups. But the main thing here is that allows for diversity, because you're getting a combination of DNA. And they use meiosis to divide up this DNA or these chromosomes. So we'll have to talk more about what chromosomes and alleles are, but we'll get to that later. So this is just a diagram showing that in meiosis, what happens is that the first stage of meiosis already happened here. So now you have 1 divided into 2, and then it's showing that if you had these 2 different chromosomes, one for a pink flower, one for a white flower, once they get divided, those chromosomes get divided. So one cell gets the white, the other cell gets the pink. And the same thing down here, one gets the white, one gets the pink. So this new embryo that could form could either get the white or the pink. It just depends which reproductive cell ends up being used in reproduction. So it's just kind of randomly distributed. So that would be sexual reproduction if you have 2 plants and the DNA gets combined. The other kind of reproduction is what they call asexual reproduction, and that's just where a plant can make a copy or a clone of itself. So it's kind of interesting how this happens, but this is just normal cell division, mitosis. And cells divide, and so the new plant that forms is identical in DNA. You could call it a clone. We talk like cloning is something new, but cloning's been going on in cells for a long time. Cells just make a copy of themselves. They clone themselves all the time. So here's one plant. One way this can happen is these little leaflets that they call these little plantlets. They will fall off, and these are made by normal cell division, and they can form into a new plant. So that's kind of unusual there, but a real common example for a lot of grasses and strawberries. They will shoot out this root to the side. It'll attach into the ground and grow into a new plant. If the original plant died off, you could still have this other plant be alive, but they're going to be genetically identical. But it's a good way that things can spread and kind of ensure the population by getting better numbers. Actually, some animals can do this too. So here you have some coral that can form these polyps, and then they can grow. So you got several of these things they're all individually alive, but they would be identical in their DNA. They don't all look exactly the same, but same DNA. In water, there's something called a Hydra, and it can form this little bud that detaches and forms into a new Hydra. So there are some, not just plants that can reproduce in this way, but even some animals that can just form a new cell just by mitosis, and it can grow into a new organism. So I'll give this example here, and they call it parthenogenesis. It's a form of sexual reproduction where an egg develops into a complete individual without being fertilized. So they say this occurs in water fleas, rotifers, aphids, stick insects, some ants, wasps, and bees. So this has happened, and especially the Komodo dragon. There was a just example in recent news where Komodo dragon, they had it in isolation, so they know it didn't mate, and it became pregnant, I guess you call it, and formed into a baby Komodo dragon. So that they can do this, but this is normal cell division and just simply mitosis. So those are the 2 forms of reproduction, and plants go through both of these, and I hope you see the difference. For sexual reproduction, you have 2 plants involved, and you get a combination of cells. For asexual reproduction, you have just one plant involved, and it just makes a copy. All right, guys, we'll talk to you later.